So if you're a black sheep in the family and you were a black sheep in childhood, stay tuned on this video because I'm going to explain something as an intuitive health medium of where the illnesses that you have currently came from being the black sheep in the childhood home. So as an intuitive health medium, when I'm looking at somebody's energy and I'm seeing where it manifests into physical illness, the black sheep is the one that I see the most in, because in the childhood home, they become the black sheep. So what I see, and this is when there's trauma in the home and there's just chaos, there's this reactive behavior that everybody adapts, and this is when there's siblings too. So there's this reactive behavior because the parents are in this toxic state of fight or flight, whether there's conflict, addiction, drinking, whatever, maybe there's even abuse, and depending on the seriousness of the chaos or the trauma, that also creates the level of illness that comes from this family. So they react, and they all have this, like the way I see it energetically is it's like this cyclone, and the parents are in there, all the siblings are in there, and then my client, who I'm seeing as the black sheep, they're like off to the side watching, and they're like, holy crap, and they're noticing that these behaviors are not serving anybody. And what's happening energetically with the family is they're like, oh, we have a family history of cancer, we have a family history of diabetes, or whatever illness, it's the family history. What I see energetically is it's a family history of toxic behaviors and being in a reactive state over and over and over, and that manifests into the family illness. It's not a family history of cancer or a family history of such and such illness. It's a family history of trauma that they're repeating in their behaviors, and the black sheep is the one that isolates themselves because they're seeing it as an intuitive, because they're born into the chaos, but they intuitively self-select out because they adapt and become very receptive and empath. They're usually very gifted empaths, very gifted intuitives, or even gifted psychics, and they're picking up on the chaos, and they isolate themselves. But here's what happens. So when they isolate themselves from that chaos, they now become targeted. The family shifts their attention. So they're over here in their cyclone, mixing around in their chaos and their crazy behaviors and their toxic whatever and their habits and yada yada, and all these things are going on. They start to target the black sheep because now, even though they've pulled themselves away to maintain a sense of safety in the home, they now become a target because they're not blending in with the family behaviors and the craziness. And what happens is it puts them in their own reactive behaviors to this feeling of being targeted, but also the feeling of not being emotionally supported or emotionally heard. So they become reactive, which causes them to become adults in the childhood home while they're still children. And they start taking care of the siblings. They start, they get jobs when they're really young, and they start maintaining adult responsibilities, which manifest into physical illnesses on the body, because the body has to mature very quickly because they're maturing very quickly physically and energetically. So they might get their menstrual cycles early, which are very heavy and very crampy, very painful. They'll have issues with urinary tract infections. They might even have issues with bowel movement or constipation because they're suppressed in their personal power in the sacral chakra, because they have to compromise that to put in the efforts of becoming an adult, taking care of the siblings, and also taking care of themselves, because the parents aren't able to do it because they're in their own toxic behaviors. They really aren't serving anybody. They're just in fight or flight reactive patterns, like just kind of going with it every day. And they have to kind of learn as they go through life because they don't have that support. And then what happens is they start to lose confidence in themselves. They lose sight of their goals and their personal self-worth because they become so reactive that they're now disconnected from themselves, which develops into stomach issues. Now they're having issues with like celiac type symptoms, or they're having issues with bloating, heartburn, different types of issues from holding stress in their stomach because they're disconnected from their self, because they've been so busy reacting and trying to maintain a sense of safety that they no longer have a sense of self. And then as this evolves, now they're in adulthood, but they've been adults since kids. So now they have energy deficits in their heart, and they have issues in their throat because they weren't supported, they weren't emotionally heard. And so they suppress their emotions in their heart, they suppress the energy of their voice. Now they have issues possibly with their thyroid, they have issues with TMJ, they clench their teeth, usually in their sleep, or they'll sometimes just clench their teeth just throughout the day. They have chronic neck pain. They might even suffer chronic migraines or a buzzing sensation in the ear. And they also have shortness of breath. They shallow breathe because they're still in that stress state from childhood. They're starting to repeat that own pattern because they're the black sheep. Now they're in their own space, reacting with their own sense of trauma. With the black sheep, they become the healers. They're the healers in the family because of being able to separate themselves early in childhood and not repeat those toxic patterns and behaviors. They're breaking those karmic cycles in the family. They're breaking that cycle of trauma, and they're breaking that cycle of energy. They now have their own reactive behaviors that they have to learn from being in that reactive fight or flight pattern in being the black sheep in childhood, but they learn from it. And as an adult, they wake up physically to their body, and they start to understand and make a connection energetically with their childhood trauma and stress to the issues and symptoms they're now having physically. They wake up to it, they start making the connection, and they heal. So as they heal and that vibrates down that ancestral line and it breaks those cycles, the family members who targeted them, they feel that, and it starts to make them uncomfortable because the black sheep person is now setting boundaries as an adult. They're very intuitive and empathetic, and they're feeling and picking up on everything. They've now set boundaries, and they're protecting their energy, and they're trying to continue to maintain that sense of safety. And they start to push those toxic family behaviors and the toxic family members away to keep themselves isolated. And that's where those karmic cycles are broken. That's where those patterns are broken, and it causes the family unit to feel that, and it shifts and it changes them as well. And what happens is they either notice that difference and they start to come into that person's space with positivity because they're noticing the higher vibration and they're energetically connecting to that because they want to heal too, or they self-select out and they become even more angry and more uncomfortable, which sometimes it can even be the parents, which I'm that person. I have family members that are like, they want nothing to do with me because I've isolated myself and I've maintained boundaries. So it shifts and changes those patterns. But what happens is the black sheep in the family, they start out in childhood, they become very intuitive, they become very spiritually gifted, and as they mature and grow into adults, they're now truly gifted, they're very spiritually connected, and they become the healers in the family that break those cycles and patterns. And that's what breaks those cycles of those illnesses, and it literally heals all the way down the ancestral line.